A sperm whale slips below the reach of sunlight into a world no human body can inhabit for long. According to the documentary sources, its lungs collapse during descent, its ribs flex inward, and oxygen is directed toward the brain and working muscles. Then, its head begins to click. Air forced through structures called phonic lips creates a pulse. Inside the whale's immense forehead, the spermaceti organ, air sacs, and the structure called the junk shape that sound into a forward-directed beam. Divers have reported feeling close clicks pass through the chest like a physical punch. Anatomy this extreme inspired an irresistible idea, a living sound cannon. Yet the evidence points somewhere more intricate. A sperm whale uses focused sound to navigate and track in darkness, then returns to social groups whose clicking patterns appear to be learned and preserved across generations. What are we actually hearing? The weapon of a monster, or the operating system of an animal adapted to a world we can barely observe? That question demands several kinds of evidence kept clearly apart. Anatomy can show the structures inside the head. Tags can record sound, depth, orientation, and acceleration. Sucker scars and squid beaks are physical traces of encounters. Researchers can interpret those traces and propose mechanisms. A hypothesis remains a hypothesis until the evidence carries it further. A sperm whale is an air-breathing mammal. Every deep foraging dive begins with a finite supply of oxygen, an ocean that removes all usable light within a few hundred meters, and pressure that begins reshaping the body's air spaces the moment the animal leaves the surface behind. Imagine one breath, a single breath, carrying everything needed for what follows. The whale rolls forward at the surface, flukes lift clear of the water, and the descent begins. Within minutes, everything about the physics of that breath is under negotiation. At shallow depths, the ribcage still holds something close to its surface shape. As depth increases, pressure reduces lung volume measurably. At greater depth, the picture changes more fundamentally. The familiar image of lungs snapping shut like crushed balloons is too simple. In living, free-ranging sperm whales, scientists haven't filmed the precise moment when the gas-exchanging portions of the lungs become functionally collapsed. What anatomy, pressure mechanics, and comparative diving physiology together describe is a progressive rearrangement. As depth increases, air inside the lungs is compressed and shifted. It moves from the alveoli, where gas exchange between blood and air occurs, into larger conducting airways, where exchange is minimal. That shift has a practical benefit. It reduces the amount of nitrogen absorbed into the bloodstream, which lowers the risk of decompression injury during the return to the surface. Lowering risk isn't the same as eliminating it. Research has identified pathological findings in deep-diving whales consistent with dysbaric osteonecrosis. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution material has addressed what it describes as sperm whales experiencing something resembling decompression effects. Their diving system is extraordinary, but it's still a biological system managing a real physical problem, not one that has been solved entirely. Their rib cages help with what they can. Sperm whale ribs are connected to the spine through flexible cartilage, allowing the thorax to deform under pressure rather than resist it as a rigid structure would. Documentary accounts often describe ribs flexing inward. The precise inward movement of individual ribs in a living animal at depth hasn't been directly filmed. The supported version is more useful than the dramatic one. The chest is compliant enough to accommodate compression without structural failure. Meanwhile, the whale shifts from dependence on oxygen held in its lungs to oxygen stored in its blood and muscle tissue.
That distinction is the center of the dive. Hemoglobin is the protein inside red blood cells that transports oxygen through the circulatory system. Myoglobin holds oxygen inside muscle tissue. Deep-diving mammals invest heavily in both, accumulating reserves that far exceed what a comparably sized land mammal would carry. A sperm whale draws on those reserves throughout the dive. The nervous system participates too. When a diving mammal descends, a cascade of physiological changes called the diving response begins. Heart rate slows, reducing cardiac output, and thereby the rate at which stored blood oxygen is consumed. Blood flow to the extremities is restricted through peripheral vasoconstriction. The heart and brain retain priority. Active muscles draw on their myoglobin stores rather than waiting for blood delivery. A whale 600 meters down isn't simply holding its breath the way a person might hold their breath in a swimming pool. It has restructured its entire circulatory priority, committed its muscle oxygen reserves to the work ahead, and narrowed its dependence on the air it took in more than 10 minutes ago. A typical deep dive across various tag studies might run 30 to 50 minutes. Exceptional dives have been recorded beyond 90 minutes, with depths exceeding 1,000 meters. Some records note dives of roughly 2,250 meters. These outer boundary figures represent documented extremes, not routine foraging behavior. At the end of that dive, the whale rises. Ascending, lung function returns, nitrogen re-enters circulation, and the animal that descended as a metabolically throttled acoustic instrument breaks the surface as, briefly, an air breather again. That is the first hidden system behind the click. A body built to carry an air-breathing mammal into a place where air has no immediate use. The second system occupies much of the whale's head, and it's stranger than most animals' entire bodies. A sperm whale's forehead can account for roughly 1/3 of its total body length. Inside it sit two large oil-filled compartments, the spermaceti organ above and the junk below. Together, according to a Piaget anatomical study, these structures can constitute as much as 1/4 of the animal's body mass. To put that another way, a significant fraction of this animal's weight is a sound system. For centuries, observers understood the size of that head without understanding its mechanical sequence. Early whalers knew it was valuable. Scientists suspected it mattered for sound. The precise description of how a click travels through it took decades of anatomy, experiment, and modeling to assemble. The click begins on the right side. Sperm whales have two nasal passages, but they function very differently. The left passage handles respiration. The right passage serves sound production. There, at the front of the right nasal system, sits a single pair of structures called the phonic lips. The French term is museau de singe, monkey's muzzle. The name describes the phonic lips' appearance to those who first studied them closely. Most other toothed whales have two pairs of phonic lips and can produce two sounds simultaneously. The sperm whale operates with one pair in a single right-side nasal passage, producing a single rhythmic series of pulses. Pressurized air moves through that right nasal system and drives the phonic lips into a vibrating or clapping action. The initial pulse of a click, as anatomical sources describe it, is produced by this pneumatically driven mechanism at the monkey lips. Air enters, the tissue snaps, and something begins that will travel the full length of the whale's head before entering the ocean as directional sound. From that first vibration, current acoustic models trace a path inward and backward. Sound energy travels through the spermaceti organ, which runs nearly the full length of the whale's enormous forehead, toward a structure called the frontal air sac at the posterior of the nasal complex, near the skull. It reflects there, redirected forward, and begins traveling back through the junk and surrounding tissues toward the front of the head. What eventually leaves the whale's forehead isn't a simple omnidirectional pulse. It's a concentrated, directional signal aimed predominantly forward. Researchers call this the bent horn model because the acoustic path bends through the whale's head before projecting outward into the water. Bernd Merle and colleagues conducted experiments in 2002 with sound transmission through recently deceased sperm whale heads, supporting the internal reflection and propagation sequence. Three-dimensional beam pattern measurements, published in 2005 in the Journal of the Acoustical Society of America by Zimmer and colleagues, confirmed the model's broad outlines. None of that process has been watched in real time inside a living, clicking whale. The internal path is a reconstruction, built from anatomy, deadhead experiments, external beam recordings, and tagged animals.
Those multiple independent lines of evidence support a focused forward sonar system while leaving room for further refinement as imaging improves. The components of the spermaceti organ, junk, and associated air sacs differ from each other and from seawater in their acoustic properties. Different materials transmit and reflect sound at different rates. Those differences guide the pulse inward, bounce it, and help direct the outgoing beam. Models describe this focusing effect using the analogy of a lens because the physical logic resembles light being bent by a magnifying glass. The whale's forehead isn't a simple lens, it's a layered system of oil, fibrous tissue, air sacs, and bone, each with a different acoustic role, coordinated by evolution rather than engineering. The analogy is imperfect but useful. Sound is directed forward. Each click has a characteristic multi-pulse structure. Every pulse in the sequence is a separate event, and the interval between pulses, called the interpulse interval, is stable within a given individual and scales with the length of the animal's head. Researchers have used this relationship to acoustically estimate the body size of whales they have never seen, identifying individuals from hydrophone recordings alone. The sound that emerges from that system can reach source levels of approximately 235 to 236 decibels, referenced to 1 micropascal at 1 meter, measured underwater. Those figures require handling carefully. Underwater decibel measurements use a different reference pressure from in-air acoustic measurements. The numbers don't translate into a simple comparison with a gunshot, a jet engine, or any standard human noise reference, without a technical adjustment that substantially changes the conclusion. The important fact isn't the face value of the number, but what it represents. A highly concentrated acoustic signal designed to propagate through water and return as usable echoes. Usual clicks sweep through frequencies from below 100 Hz to approximately 30 kHz, with the majority of energy concentrated between 5 and 25 kHz. During the descent phase of a foraging dive, the whale fires these pulses in a regular rhythm, listening between each one for the returning echo. With that signal, the whale builds a map from sound. Work published in 2020 tagged animals and captured the echoes their clicks returned from targets ahead of them. Individual organisms were detectable at up to 144 meters. Schools of prey were detectable at up to 245 meters, according to that research synthesis. The same study found that fewer than 10% of organisms whose echoes the whale detected were subsequently targeted for pursuit. Only 18% of the rapid buzz sequences associated with close-range capture occurred within 50 meters of the seafloor. A sperm whale isn't spraying acoustic energy blindly into darkness. It's detecting, evaluating, and selecting. That scale of precision helps explain why some divers describe the signal in terms that are difficult to make clinical. Some have reported that close clicks arrive not as sound they hear, but as something they feel. A pulse entering the chest, vibrating through bone and tissue. Documentary narration has compared the sensation to a physical punch. Those reports aren't controlled physiological measurements. The available sources note that claims of systematic harm from sperm whale clicks involve what one field-oriented account describes as sloppy reporting and anecdotal exaggeration. No study in the supplied evidence base establishes injury, paralysis, internal damage, or a universal human response to proximity. Distance matters. The orientation of the whale's beam matters. The type of click matters. Still, the reports convey something accurate about the animal's scale. At close range, a sperm whale's sonar can feel less like a distant call than an event in the water around a body. For decades, that sensation fed a darker theory. In 1983, Kenneth S. Norris and Danish bioacoustician Bertil Mohl published an article in The American Naturalist asking whether toothed whales could debilitate prey with sound. Norris had co-authored the foundational 1972 theory of the spermaceti organ's acoustic role with G.W. Harvey. By 1983, that theoretical framework had been extended by others, and the extreme sound levels measured from sperm whales were already documented. The new paper proposed that intense acoustic pulses might affect soft-bodied prey, particularly squid, at close range. Sperm whales sat near the center of the argument because of their hypertrophied nasal anatomy and the intensity of their clicks. Later commentators attached a vivid shorthand to the idea, the biological Big Bang. The phrase that reached popular audiences was often simpler still: sound cannon. Norris and Merle's own language was careful. The hypothesis was explicitly described as conjectural. They were proposing a mechanism for investigation, not reporting an observed kill. The idea persisted in popular accounts because it fitted a pre-existing template. A vast animal descends into darkness, points its enormous head at a squid, and fires an invisible weapon. Giant falls stunned. The whale glides in and feeds. The evidentiary record does not support telling that story as established fact. The clearest counter-evidence came in 2016. Researchers attached digital archival tags, D-tags, to 6 free-ranging sperm whales, 3 off the eastern coast of the United States and 3 off northern Norway. The tags were designed to record both acoustic data and motion-related variables, including depth, orientation, and body acceleration. Over 82 foraging dives, the tags collected approximately 66 hours of combined data. No cameras were involved. The tags couldn't show researchers what the whales were eating or how their mouths were moving during prey capture attempts. What the tags did record was detailed and specific. During the search phase of each dive, the whales produced usual clicks at a regular rate. As they approached what the researchers interpreted as prey, the clicking rate increased, and the clicks transformed into rapid trains called buzzes or creaks. Buzzes are the acoustic signature of the terminal approach phase in toothed whale foraging. During those terminal buzzes, 2 things happened simultaneously. The intervals between clicks shortened, and the estimated source level of each click dropped by 20 to 40 decibels, 1 to 2 orders of magnitude quieter than the search phase clicks. At the moment the whales were closest to their prey, they reduced their acoustic output. The body also accelerated. The researchers noted transient bursts of acceleration near the end of buzz sequences, which the paper describes as jerks. Combined with the anatomy of the sperm whale's jaw and tongue, those acceleration patterns were interpreted as consistent with suction feeding, the rapid jaw and tongue movements that create negative pressure in the mouth and pull prey inward. Suction feeding is an interpretation of motion and anatomical data. The tag data didn't supply video of a squid being drawn into a whale's mouth. The study authors were clear that the captured data represented instrumental recordings of sound and movement, not direct visual evidence of prey capture. What the acoustic data did directly challenge was the sound cannon claim. The study's published conclusion was explicit. Observed received levels during the terminal phase of prey encounters precluded acoustic stunning as the prey capture mechanism. A system designed to stun prey with sound should concentrate its output at the moment of use. These whales reportedly reduced their output and shortened their click intervals, behavior consistent with getting high-resolution information from a very nearby target. That finding does not diminish the hunt, it clarifies it. Physical evidence adds texture without resolving the gap. Circular sucker scars on the skin of sperm whales support close encounters with squid, including large squid. Squid beaks in stomach contents establish diet. A diet study in the Azores examined the stomach contents of 17 sperm whales, 15 males and 2 females, caught between 1981 and 1984, documenting cephalopod remains and squid beaks. Scars record contact, beaks record consumption. Neither source provides a camera angle on a hunt thousands of meters below the surface. The evidence base consists of a descending animal, search clicks, returning echoes, a terminal buzz, an acceleration trace, a sucker scar, and a beak in a stomach. Each element was collected separately, at different times, from different whales, by different methods. Together, they describe an animal equipped to find and pursue prey in absolute darkness, with acoustic precision that humans can now measure, without ever having seen it happen. The click changes its character when the whale is with others. Sperm whale vocalizations fall into several distinct categories. Usual clicks belong to the hunt and to long-range sensing. Slow clicks are produced mainly by males, often in contexts suggesting long-range signaling between individuals separated by large distances. Rapid buzzes mark the terminal approach to prey. Codas are something different. A coda is a short, patterned sequence of clicks, typically 3 to 12 clicks, arranged in a stereotyped rhythm, produced by female sperm whales and immatures in social circumstances. Codas aren't hunting signals given a different inflection. They belong to a different acoustic class, with a different structure, a different context, and, the evidence suggests, a different social function. Researchers have been recording and cataloging codas in multiple ocean basins since the 1980s. The accumulated data reveal a pattern with significant social implications. Groups of sperm whales traveling together produce codas that differ systematically from the codas produced by other groups in the same broad area. The distinction isn't random. It follows recognizable repertoires. Those repertoires align with large-scale groupings that researchers have come to call vocal clans. In 2003, Hal Whitehead and Luke Rendell introduced the term clan specifically to describe these large-scale social structures defined by shared acoustic patterns. A clan can span thousands of kilometers and contain thousands of individuals. Different clans can occupy the same general geographic range, hearing the same ocean and facing the same ecological pressures, while producing meaningfully different codas and tending not to associate closely with members of other clans. Whales from different vocal clans, as one cultural partitioning study documents, have distinct coda type and usage repertoires and generally don't associate with each other, even when they occur in sympatry. That last phrase carries the argument. If different groups lived in different places, different acoustic patterns could simply reflect different local environments. When two groups occupy the same waters and hear the same ocean, while maintaining separate repertoires and avoiding social contact with one another, the repertoires are doing something specifically social. Studies of population genetics haven't identified significant nuclear DNA differentiation between vocal clans in most cases. The variation is acoustic, not genetic in any obvious biological sense. That points towards social transmission. Calves exposed to the codas of their group come to produce those codas themselves over time. The mechanism is consistent with cultural transmission in the limited scientific meaning of behavior or information passed between individuals through social contact rather than through the genome. Directly observing every individual calf acquiring a particular coda through a documented act of imitation and practice remains difficult. These animals spend most of their lives below the surface. The population-level evidence for social learning is, according to an eLife-reviewed preprint and several long-term field studies, substantial enough to support the conclusion that coda repertoires are socially maintained markers of group identity. A 2022 paper in PNAS examined whether certain codas function specifically as symbolic markers of clan membership, signaling group identity to other whales in the same water. The research supported clan-level identity signaling through these stereotyped acoustic patterns. Identity expressed in rhythm. A 2024 study published in Nature Communications described the structural properties of codas with greater resolution than previous work. The analysis identified variation in rhythm, tempo, and what the researchers described as rubato and ornamentation. A coda isn't simply a fixed sequence of clicks repeated identically each time. Its properties vary in ways that are systematic rather than random, building a combinatorial structure that can encode more information than a small number of fixed calls would allow. Some researchers have explored whether that combinatorial structure might extend to something resembling syntax, rules governing how elements combine in ways that affect meaning. The 2024 structural work found evidence for contextual and combinatorial organization without decoding what any specific context or combination means to the animals producing it. Project SETI, the Cetacean Translation Initiative, has applied machine learning to large-scale recordings of sperm whale vocalizations, particularly in the waters around Dominica in the Eastern Caribbean, where Shane Gero and colleagues have conducted long-term field research. The project's stated focus is structural characterization, identifying recurring units, measuring timing relationships, mapping contexts, and building computational models of what statistical patterns exist across large acoustic datasets. Structural characterization isn't translation. A machine learning model that identifies consistent acoustic units and their combinations has done something valuable and something limited simultaneously. It has described a pattern. It hasn't assigned that pattern a meaning verifiable against independent behavior. Researchers involved in this work have been clear in published accounts that decoded sentences, a semantic dictionary, and human equivalent grammar remain beyond what any current project has established. A sperm whale phonetic alphabet, as some associated work has proposed provisionally, would be a framework for describing recurring units in vocalizations, not a set of keys to the animal's intentions. The honest position is precise. Humans now know that sperm whale coders have more structure than a fixed repertoire of simple calls. The structure may be more elaborate than previously assumed. Its full meaning, if meaning in any decodable sense is present at all, hasn't been established. And no supplied evidence decodes a sentence, establishes intent, or demonstrates communication equivalent to human language. That boundary matters because of how easily it could be crossed by wishful thinking. The intellectual payoff is the boundary itself. We can hear and classify patterns while still failing to understand their meaning. For most of human history, the absence of understanding produced something simpler than humility. On the 20th of November 1820, the Nantucket whale ship Essex was reportedly rammed twice by a large sperm whale in the open Pacific, far from land. The ship sank. Survivors spent months in small open boats, enduring conditions Owen Chase, the vessel's first mate, later documented in a survivor's narrative. That account circulated in whaling ports and reached the broader public. Herman Melville drew on it and on other sources when he wrote Moby Dick, or The Whale, published in 1851, 31 years after the Essex went down. The white whale of that novel attacks with purpose, embodies something supernatural, and became one of English literature's most enduring monsters. The collision itself is historically documented. 2 impacts, a sinking hull, survivors in open boats, an account by a man who was present. What the whale experienced, intended, or understood in those moments isn't accessible through any evidence Chase recorded or any witness described. Later accounts supplied motives, because people supply motives to events that frighten them. Revenge, malice, deliberate retribution. These are human categories applied to an animal whose behavior in that moment remains, from a scientific standpoint, without a knowable cause. The cultural image that resulted was powerful and durable. A sperm whale large enough to sink a ship, carrying inside its head something men would kill for. The thing men would kill for was spermaceti. The waxy material extracted from the spermaceti organ became commercially vital across several industries simultaneously. Candles made from spermaceti produced a cleaner, brighter, and less odorous flame than tallow candles. The finest wax candles of the early industrial era were made from it, according to historical whaling sources. Spermaceti and sperm oil went into soap, cosmetics, leather waterproofing, and rust prevention. Industrial machinery relied on whale oil for lubrication. Invented machines required it. The same head complex, now understood as the site of one of the most sophisticated biological acoustic systems ever described, was cut apart to grease factory equipment and feed lamps. The head that shapes clicks through absolute darkness was rendered into candles. Hunters didn't know what they were removing in acoustic terms. The 1972 Norris Harvey theory that gave the spermaceti organ a plausible functional acoustic role came more than a century after the industrial peak of sperm whale hunting. The detailed bent horn model, confirming that role in 3-dimensional beam measurements, came in 2005. In those intervening decades, Millions of animals had already been removed from the ocean. Global population size before industrialized whaling can't be established from a pre-whaling census because none exists. A 2022 modeling study estimated approximately 1.95 million sperm whales globally around 1710, and approximately 844,761 in 2022. These are modeled outputs with considerable uncertainty, not counted animals. Different studies reach different totals. What is consistent across estimates is the broad conclusion. Current numbers remain well below historical abundance. One modeling result places present populations at roughly 43% of the estimated pre-whaling baseline. The International Whaling Commission voted for a commercial whaling moratorium in 1982. It took effect beginning with the 1985-86 whaling season, the date commonly identified as 1986. That decision changed the scale of commercial hunting. It didn't restore populations to pre-whaling levels, end all mortality risks, or reverse the cumulative social effects of removing so many animals from communities built around long-term social bonds and learned acoustic traditions. Sperm whales remain listed globally as vulnerable in IUCN-related material. NOAA designates them as endangered under the United States Endangered Species Act and depleted under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Their reproductive parameters help explain why those designations persist long after a moratorium. Female sperm whales generally reach sexual maturity between 9 and 10 years of age. Gestation runs approximately 14 to 16 months. Interbirth intervals are measured in years, typically estimated at 4 to 6 years depending on population and study. An animal that invests 14 to 16 months in a single pregnancy and then does not reproduce again for 4 to 6 years can't quickly replace sustained industrial killing. The mathematics of the whaling era, applied to those reproductive figures, produces a slow-motion accounting of loss that took generations to create and may take generations more to recover from. The loss also had a social dimension that numbers alone can't capture. Sperm whale social units center on females and immatures. Coda repertoires are produced and transmitted within those groups. Vocal clans span thousands of kilometers, but depend on individual social units to carry and transmit acoustic culture from older animals to calves. Removing large-scale populations of whales didn't only reduce headcount, it broke social networks, disrupted learning chains, and likely altered acoustic culture in ways no one was positioned to measure at the time. A sperm whale's body also participates in the deep-sea ecosystem long after its death. When a large carcass reaches the sea floor, it becomes what researchers call a whale fall, a concentrated organic resource in an environment where food arrives infrequently and in small amounts. Whale falls support a succession of deep-sea communities as the carcass and its remaining nutrients are consumed over time. Some whale fall systems support distinct deep-sea community succession for decades, with exceptional cases estimated to persist for close to a century, depending on conditions. The same body that echolocated through darkness and carried a group's coda repertoire through the water for decades becomes, in death, a feature of the seafloor economy that an entirely different set of species depends on. Return now to the click in the dark. A sperm whale descends with a single breath's worth of oxygen and a body adapted to manage its loss over 30 to 50 minutes or more. The lungs' gas-exchanging portions reduce their function as pressure builds. The rib cage accommodates the change. Heart rate slows. Blood flow narrows to the organs the whale can't afford to lose. Myoglobin in the muscles carries what the blood no longer delivers. At the front of the whale's right nasal passage, pressurized air reaches the phonic lips. A single pulse begins. Current acoustic models describe it traveling backward through the spermaceti organ, reflecting at the frontal sac, then forward through the junk, shaped by the layered acoustic properties of oil, tissue, bone, and air, into a directional beam that projects ahead of the animal. That beam returns information. At long range, it detects organisms and schools. As the whale closes, click timing and level adjust. The 2016 D-tag recordings of 6 whales off Norway and the eastern United States documented what happens in the terminal phase. Source levels drop by 20 to 40 decibels. Interclick intervals shorten. The body accelerates. Researchers interpreted those patterns as close-range echolocation and pursuit. The tag data provided no footage of the capture itself. After the dive, among other whales, the click changes. Short, pattern sequences, codas, are produced in the social setting. Those sequences follow repertoires that researchers have documented as clan-specific across thousands of kilometers of ocean. The evidence supports social transmission of these patterns rather than genetic determination. Recent computational work found combinatorial and contextual structure in those codas that exceeds what a simple, fixed call repertoire would produce. Whether that structure carries meaning in any sense decodable by human analysis remains an open question. No decoded sentence, no semantic dictionary, and no human equivalent grammar have been established by any supplied research. Project SETI and associated researchers are working on structural characterization. That is where the current evidence actually reaches. There are also things the science can't yet tell us about how individual whales experience any of this. The darkness, the pressure, the acoustic map made from returning echoes, the click of another animal that might mark a social boundary. The sperm whale does not need those unknowns filled in by invention. It does not need a sonic weapon proven, a language decoded, a motive assigned to the 1820 collision in the Pacific, or a superior morality attributed to an animal that has spent millions of years doing something far more interesting than resembling a person. The strongest wonder here isn't a proven sonic weapon or a mind translated into human terms. It's an air-breathing animal built for darkness, shaping sound into a map and carrying learned signals through a world we can barely enter. Humans can describe parts of the mechanism. We can record the clicks. We still can't claim to know everything they mean. That boundary should leave us with humility and with enough concern to protect the life behind the sound. Subscribe for more stories like this.